The Last Lighthouse is a recent game published by Button Shy Games, and like all of their previous games, it comes in a plastic pouch, very portable. Many of their games are solo friendly or simply solo, and this is a simply solo one. It is a game of lighthouse defense, very similar to tower defense, with a lighthouse, in which you will have your lighthouse that you need to defend from horrors that are coming from the sea, and you use this card as a tracker. Every time the lighthouse is attacked, it loses 1 life. Some effects will allow you to regenerate, to heal the lighthouse. Point being that if the lighthouse is overwhelmed at any point during the game, you lose the game. If there is even just 1 health point left when the deck is exhausted at the end of your turn, then you win the game. This deck is made of cards that represent monsters on one side with all sorts of effects from when you place them, when they are defeated. This is how many life points they have, so to defeat this monster you need to produce 3 points of damage in a single attack. Damage doesn't carry over multiple attacks. And also they have range values, how far they can attack in either direction. For example, this one can attack a card adjacent to the left and a card adjacent to the right, but this monster here can attack up to 2 cards away on the right and 3 cards away on the left. And we'll see what that means. To set up the game, you shuffle the cards. Oh, the other side, that's super important for us. I was forgetting. These are the traps. That's what we use, kind of like Home Alone or Lighthouse Alone, I guess. We set up traps to defeat the monsters. The traps also similarly have effects for when they're placed and possibly defeated. A number of life points that will cause the trap to be defeated if the monsters inflict that much damage, and again, the range up to which they can attack the monsters. To set up the game, you shuffle the deck, you give yourself a hand of 4 cards, and so you look at them on the trap side, and then you will place 4 cards out there to represent the sea. Now, how many of those cards represent traps and how many represent monsters depends on you, depends on the difficulty setting. If all 4 starting cards represent nightmares, then you're playing, well, appropriate enough, I guess, the nightmare mode. You can choose to play it a little easier version by having a number of these cards starting as traps. And suppose that we'll do 1 just for the sake of the example. Like that. So we start with 3 monsters and 1 trap. So at the beginning of each turn you take 2 actions, and the actions can be any combination of setting traps and or killing monsters, plus whatever other actions may be given to you by possibly when placed effects. And suppose that I decide to spend my first action placing a card there. Every time that a card is added to the sea, then you simply move cards around to make room for it. And if a card is removed from the sea, then you simply close the gap. So I can take, again, the action of placing a trap. Which I just did, and the other action that I have available is to defeat monsters. And I simply choose a monster and I check that there are enough traps in range firing at it so that I have enough points to defeat it. To defeat this monster, I need to inflict 2 points of damage, so I need to have 2 traps firing at it. This fires 1 at the distance of 1 on its left, so that would be 1 point of damage. This also fires up to 3 away, so there would be 2 points of damage. I could defeat this one. I could still defeat it if I had placed the trap there, because this one only attacks 1 adjacent, this one up to 3, so I can still defeat that one. So my first action was to place a trap, my second action to defeat it, and when I defeat a card, first I need to check the effect. Ooh, if within range 2 from the lighthouse, you take 2 damage, so good that I defeat that when it was still far from the lighthouse. I close the gap, and the monsters that I defeat go into my hand as a trap, which is important because you don't draw cards in this game otherwise. So that's for my two actions, place traps and or activate traps to attack monsters. Then a couple of other phases, we add a nightmare to the sea, that's the second step. Then the monsters attack. They will still try to attack, they will first try to attack the lighthouse. All those who can will. This one attacks up to 4 away, so that's definitely attacks and causes damage. This one up to 3 away. What the heck? 1, 2, 3. That also attacks the lighthouse. Pretty bad. Maybe I should have taken care of that one instead. Then, if they do not manage to attack the lighthouse, say you have a nice comfortable buffer traps in between the lighthouse and the monsters, then the monsters attack the traps instead, and it's the same thing. Suppose that somehow these two had not attacked the lighthouse, nobody had attacked the lighthouse, then this trap is destroyed because it is attacked from range 1. From that one, it only has 1 life point. And so this one would be that. So if the lighthouse takes no damage, then and only then do you check all the traps and see how many of those are destroyed. And a trap is destroyed. If a trap is destroyed, it is discarded. After the monsters attack, the tide changes. So you will move the card in the sea, which is on the leftmost side of the line. If it is a monster, it simply goes to the bottom of the row, ready to crawl or swim towards the lighthouse again. If it is a trap, suppose that this is the situation during the tide changes phase. If it is a trap, it is discarded. And at the end, you also check the sea. If last phase of a turn is survey the sea, if there are 4 monsters in a row with no traps to create a break, then the lighthouse takes a point of damage. So to summarize, and yes, the turn may feel a bit fiddly, the first turn or two really until you get the flow. Perform 2 actions, playing traps and or activating traps to defeat monsters. Add a monster to the row, the nightmares attack the lighthouse, and in case they fail, they attack traps. The tide changes, and you check to see if there are 4 monsters in a row, and if that is the case, the lighthouse takes damage. If the lighthouse is overwhelmed, you lose the game. If the lighthouse is still standing by the time the deck is exhausted, then you win the game. This is a really nice little game. Little, of course, in terms of physical production, but also very light in terms of strategy and gameplay. Which is peculiar because at the beginning it can feel a little bit fiddly and even overcomplicated. The first couple of rounds you're likely to either struggle to remember all the steps of the sequence, at least I did. You're even more likely to forget some of the effects. You resolve the monster phase and you realize, oh wait, but this turn there was an effect that I had to remember, the monsters had extra range, stuff like that. You will likely forget some when placed, when defeated effects, but after a while you get that. After a while it means if it takes 2 full plays to really become familiar, that means in half an hour, 20 minutes, you'll be familiar because the game is 10 minutes long or so. So it doesn't take much for the mechanics to click together. And what you have then, however, is not particularly deep, complicated game or complex game. It's more like a tactical game. Doesn't quite feel like a puzzle, which I thought it might at the beginning, because ultimately, again, you don't have a huge ability to plan from turn to turn because the tide changes, because the cards come out in a specific random ways. You have a certain amount, like maybe this time, maybe this turn I'll plan 2 traps and knowing what the tide does, and if I don't mess up too much, I'll be able to do 2 attacks next time, and I'll accept a degree of damage now, trying to do better next time. You can do that to some extent, but never to the point that it feels particularly cerebral or again complex. It is mainly, well, I'm looking at the tactical situation which changes every time, and I have some ability to make choices which do feel interesting, and when you do pull off a combo, it does feel rewarding. But again, it remains very simple. There are certain things that will look obviously terrible and you're not going to do them. Some other things that will look obviously awesome and you're likely to do them. It's mainly a light game, again, in terms of gameplay. It is also light in terms of challenge. I started not with the very basic mode, but maybe I think with the normal one. You start with 2 nightmares and 2 traps, and I found it was super easy to win. And then I started increasing the difficulty, and even the nightmare level was very manageable, very manageable. Something strange is that you may have some effects that add a lot of nightmares to the sea, and as long as you place a trap in there, so that you don't have 4 in a row, that gives you extra damage. Having a lot of monsters in the sea shortens the game, which makes it easier. And I guess the idea is that now is the dawn and the sunlight is destroying or sending away the monsters, so it is fine. But when in the game with this huge army of monsters at the threshold, at the gate of the lighthouse, seems a little bit strange thematically. I wonder if a way of making the game more difficult could be to, as a matter of rule, that you do have to defeat a number of nightmares at the end. You cannot just be the deck that is empty, but you also need to clean the sea a little bit more. I don't know. But as is, what you have is a light game with great art. It feels thematic from the point of view of Lovecraftian lore. It does feel like you're there in the lighthouse and you're not sure you can trust your mind. There is this ambiguity: are these actual monsters or are indeed products of your imagination? The lore, the feel, the atmosphere is very nice. Gameplay, again, is simple and light, and it is about reacting to randomness and trying to create some interesting combos here and there. So, as a light solo game, the last Lighthouse is definitely a pleasant one.